experience for me personally.
I think that set, for example, the 18th century bedroom, I think you were particularly struck by it, the whole feel of it, to be inside that, And then at this point, it's just you and Kubrick, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Everyone else is gone, I thought.
Yeah, that's true.
It's just the two of you in a room that's almost like this.
Well, I mainly remember that the oldest version of my character on the bed, reaching up toward the monolith, that was a 12-hour makeup. It took a long time. I was quite tired. I was glad I was on a bed.
I think you have your own theory. I mean, obviously, it's a mystery what's going on at this point in the film. A lot of interpretation, a lot of people going, what? But you have your own theory.
Well, it's interesting. It's one of the questions that myself or Gary Lockwood, who plays the other astronaut, are asked, because we do a lot of autograph shows, and people come up and say, what does this film mean? What is the ultimate meaning? And at some interview, Stanley Kubrick, I think, gave, in a sense, the best answer to that question. And he said, how do you describe in words Beethoven's Fifth Symphony? You can't. Every human being that hears that music has their own particular response depending on the persona they bring to that experience. And the perfect proof of that is the Blue Danube, which is in this very important place in space. Supposing somebody had never seen this film, what will the first thing they think of when they hear the Blue Danube? Vienna? Or a river? But as somebody who's seen this film, like all of you, chances are you'll think of this film, or of space. Of those two people, who's correct? There is no answer. They're all correct. I think Stanley Kubrick intentionally did not over-explain this film. And I think, it's filled with metaphor. And you can kind of explain it on a mundane level, from my point of view, because as actors, our characters are subjective in terms of what's going on. We have what we think is a mission, in my case. And, there isn't a lot of dialogue between Gary Lockwood and myself, or Frank Boole and myself. And that's because you got to remember these two characters have been in space for months and months and months. They've talked it all out. Oh, where'd you go to school? I went to school, and so on and so forth. It's all been said. There's nothing left day to day but the same routine, day after day after day. So that's why I think there's so little dialogue until things begin to happen with Hal.
I'm sure there's some people in the audience with some interpretations or maybe seen things in the film.
I mean, I have my, I think my own interpretation of that last room, since you brought it up,
yes,
is that, when we capture a polar bear, we put them in a zoo, we build an artificial pond, maybe an artificial cave, to try to make the polar bear feel at home in the zoo. Well, you got to remember that people, in a sense, who have, I won't use the word captured, but have come over the the transformation of my character, just as in the beginning of the film, we see a transformation from early man, ape men, to the next level, which is modern man. We see that in, as I said earlier, when he thrusts the bone in the air and we see a space vehicle, or in this case, a nuclear weapon. There's a similar transformation, but it's caused by the alien presence that Kubrick, I think, was very smart never to show a bug-eyed monster. We never do see the alien. We only see the effect of the alien. And we got to remember that the aliens were millions of years, this is what my understanding of it was, that the aliens are millions of years in advance of us when they first came by and left the monolith in the moon and affected primitive man. So you can imagine what their advance is. So they had the ability, perhaps, to go inside my character's mind and read the mind like you would a tape recorder. And maybe I walked through the Louvre Museum and saw all these paintings. Well, the aliens they just saw habitat.
So they created this room to make me feel at ease. I mean, that's kind of an, but you see, as soon as you try to explain it, it kind of takes the magic away from the film. And I think that's why this is 50 years later and you all are here, many of you having seen the film, and there's a reason for that. And it's because Stanley made a decision not to over-explain. Now, if you read Arthur C. Clarke's book, it does explain more things than the film does.
Okay, look, we have two roving mics here, one on one side, one on the other, so Martin, I know you've been so anxious to tell this story.
Right.
We came here for that purpose.
Well, I just want to say that it's a real pleasure to be here tonight, Keir. This is the fourth time I've seen this film in the cinema, but I'm always drawn back to the first time I saw it, which is when it first came to Derry in summer 1969. And I took my then girlfriend to the film, and we sat through it. It came out at the end, you know, and I, of course, was 18 then, and was so anxious to impress this girl. She's now sitting beside me, 49 years later, so we're still here. But that night, it was a late afternoon we came out, and she asked me the question that Marty has just asked you. What was that last scene all about? And you can imagine my concern at 18 years old, trying to impress this girl, not having a clue what it was about, not having the words. And I'm only sorry that you weren't there beside me at that time to try and help me to explain what the story was, what the end was all about.
Didn't seem to do any harm though.
No, it really didn't do us any harm, you know, we're still together.
You know, you might be interested in the little history of what the reaction was when the film first came out. More than half of the reviews, of the major reviews, were quite terrible. Terrible review. There were 30 or 40% were quite good and some were brilliant. But the majority of the reviews were terrible. And the premiere, the New York premiere, there were three major premieres. It was, the first one was Washington, D.C., then New York City, and then Los Angeles. And I went to all three. And in the New York premiere, 250 people walked out. So you can imagine MGM was a little worried about this film. However, within about 2 months, suddenly there were lines around the block for this film. And it suddenly became a moneymaker. And MGM kind of, and the makeup of those lines was the young generation, people your age at the time. It was the young generation, it was the generation that were protesting the Vietnam War and that were lining up around the block. And MGM kind of figured, well, maybe these young people were smoking funny cigarettes. So they came out with a new poster. The new poster said, 2001: A Space Odyssey, the ultimate trip. Anyway, I just thought you might be interested in that.
Years always get in, yeah.
Young lady.
Thanks very much for that, Keir. It's great to see this tonight. I remember seeing the film with my dad when I was 7, so I guess you know how old I am now. And I'm here tonight with my son. But what I'm interested in is the depiction of the astronaut you portray in the film, and how he's aged during the film. And I know for us, watching a film over and over again over the years, these characters live with us over these years as an audience member. But I'm wondering about your feelings to see an older astronaut depicted on the screen, and I wonder if you feel any connection to that depiction.
You mean now that I'm grown older? Well, I'm not identifying with the old fellow on the bed. No, it's interesting. I mean, we did a lot of discussing. There was a lot of discussion with Stanley and Gary Lockwood and myself about the characters that we were going to play, and we came up with the fact that not only did these characters probably have double doctorates in certain scientific subjects, but that
the psychological profile of both characters would be such that what would cause you and I screaming out the door, screaming at the top of our lungs, would only raise an eyebrow with the two of us. That we would have such steady and solid psychological profiles to deal with the unexpected. And certainly the only time, you know, it was commented in many of the reviews that, in a way, the two characters we played were more machine-like than Hal, who was a machine in a sense. And I've already said why that, you know, that a lot, you know, we've been there for months and why there was kind of such a low key. But in a way, I think we just came to the decision that we were low key because this is part of our persona, and that's partly why we've been chosen to go on this mission. There's a young lady there that you wanted to ask a question, yeah?
Mr. Dullea,
Oh,
thank
I'm
you very
sorry.
much.
I didn't see your hand raising, sorry.
Pleasure to see you. You mentioned that Mr. Clarke revealed some more insight in his book. Have you, I suppose you've read the book, it's to my great shame I haven't, but is there, does he reveal anything about the ending? And I suppose Mr. Kubrick deliberately left a certain vagueness to that ending. Is there a little bit more about it in Mr. Clarke's book?
The very ending, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. You know, it's been so long since I read the book, I almost can't remember, to tell you the truth. I can't really accurately...
I think the Star Child coming back to Earth sets off all these nuclear weapons, because all these satellites are actually nuclear
Oh yeah,
weapons.
in the book, again, he postulates that the Soviet Union, the United States, have both powers have nuclear weapons in constant orbit around the Earth, any one of which could be rain death upon the at a push of a button. And the presence of my transformed character, the fetus, so to speak, which represents the next stage of mankind, I think, in my opinion, is able to nullify all those nuclear weapons. And that's in the book, but that's not in the film.
If I just, could I make a second question? The part about the HAL, the artificial intelligence, was that also in Arthur C. Clarke's book? Because
Oh,
I
yeah.
find it's very prescient and
Absolutely.
he sees the danger of it even.
Yeah.
in
We didn't have
1968.
that voice to work with. You might be interested. Stanley couldn't make up his mind in terms of what the quality of the voice should be. There was a well-known actor you may or may not have heard of by the name of Martin Balsam. Marty Balsam was in quite a few well-known films. He decided he was too New York. So then he had a British actor by the name of Nigel Davenport, who was only on the film for about a week, and he said, oh, no, it's too British. So he said, I'll worry about it in post-production after we were all done. So he just turned to his assistant director, and by the way, the whole film was filmed in London, or north of London, at British MGM Studios. And he just turned to his assistant director, Derek Cracknell was his name, and said, you do the voice of Hal, okay? So for the rest of the film, which was most of the film, this was the voice of Hal for us. Oh, it's all like this, you know what I mean? You know, it's all like Michael Caine, yeah. Oh yeah, that was the way he was, you know? So that was the voice of Hal for us. The actor who played the voice, Douglas Rains, he's not very well known outside of Canada. He's a Canadian actor, but in Canada, he's known as the Laurence Olivier of Canada. He played all the great Shakespearean roles at Stratford in Canada for many, many years, and is very well known up there. So that was the voice that you heard for Hal.
Extraordinary voice. Did you just think? Yeah.
How lovely to get to see you. This is my first time getting to see this film on the big screen, but it's a film I've grown up with, and it's hugely influential on loads of science fiction films that I've grown up with. And even more recent films, like you see the red leather suits kind of ripped off in Alien, Prometheus. and you've got Moon by Duncan Jones, which is very much of the same sort of atmosphere. And I've even seen it implied in an interview with David Bowie himself, saying that he was inspired to take the name from Dave Bowman and make it Bowie. So how does it feel to be from one of the most kind of have been part of one of the most influential science fiction films of all time?
Well, I feel very honored. I felt that way when I was cast. I had no idea I was being considered. I was filming a film with Laurence Olivier called Bunny Lake is Missing with Carol Lindley, and I came home one night and my wife said, "Call your agent. Your agent called." So I called my agent, and he said, "Are you sitting down?" I said, "No, why?" "You better sit down." I said, "Why?" "You've just been offered the lead in Stanley Kubrick's next film." And so it was totally out of the blue. And I was a huge Kubrick fan. When I was in drama school in a while back. And I can tell you, it was 1957, and somebody said, "Hey, there's this great war picture down the street. You gotta go see it. It's starring Kirk Douglas." So I went and saw it. I couldn't believe my eyes. Within seconds of this film, my chin dropped to my knees. I said, it was called Paths of Glory. If you have Netflix, or if you have some way of getting an old film, you ever shown it here? Oh, it's my favorite Kubrick film. Anyway, and then he did Lolita and Dr. Strangelove and
You were next then.
Huh? Many, yeah, and so I was a huge fan. To be cast by Stanley Kubrick, I couldn't believe my ears. It turned out to be a wonderful experience, and I'm very lucky to have been chosen by this genius. Yeah, right. Get this lady's been very patient.
Hi. On the subject of the character, Hal's character, I guess, it's brought up early in the film that the machine could have potentially developed emotions. What's your opinion on this?
That the machine could what? I didn't quite hear.
Develop emotions. Do you think Hal at some point learned to not just mimic human emotions, but physically develop them?
Early in the film, they're suggesting that the machine could have developed emotions. So the question is, do you think that
the machine...
Hal could have developed emotions?
Oh.
That's suggesting, yeah.
Yes, I think you're right, and I think that's why some people felt that we were more machine-like than the Hal character. And
The death scene of Hal is very actually moving.
well, that's for me the most dramatic scene in the film was when I was, in a sense, killing Hal, taking his brain apart. And any of you ever seen a movie called Of Mice and Men? With Burgess Meredith, and then they made a second movie, I think, with John Malkovich, I think, did another movie of it. But it's about a relationship between a man, Burgess Meredith played it, and his mentally retarded friend, very retarded. But they're so close, and throughout the film, they're getting on so well, and they discuss how they're going to have a ranch together, and the retarded ones is, and then George, we're going to have cows, and then we're going to have chickens, and the other characters, that's right, they have the same conversation throughout the movie. Well, at the end, toward the end, this retarded man inadvertently kills a young girl on a ranch, and they're after him. They want to string him up, and his friend knows that that's going to happen if he's captured. So what he does, they go back to that conversation about how this story, they're going to have the ranch together, and while he's talking with this friend, he's reaching behind him with a pistol and shoots him to put him out of his misery because he doesn't want to see his best friend strung up. Well, emotionally, I know it may sound completely different than 2001, but for me as the actor, what I used was the memory of seeing that film. Because in a sense, throughout the beginning of the film, you see, I show Hal a picture that I've been drawing toward at the beginning of the film. So we have a real relationship. And then what happens in the film, and so I have to take him apart. And he says, about singing Daisy, Daisy.
And I say, yeah, sing it for me, Hal. Sing it for me. I'm trying to put him at ease while I'm murdering him, in a sense.
Comparison then with the apes at the beginning, you know, as killer, killing machines. It's an extraordinary sort of character, Hal, really, in the whole history of cinema, I think. Just a red eye and silence, and the emotion that you get from this one shot
Yeah.
is just incredible. Anyone else?
Well, it's nice to have you here.
Thank you.
How did you feel about your like? How did you get along with everyone that you worked with on the film?
Oh, there wasn't a lot. Well, there was a wonderful crew, and in terms of actors, there was just one other actor, and that was Gary Lockwood. And working with Stanley Kubrick, people that ask me very often, what was it like working with Stanley Kubrick? Well, it was anything but scary. He had to put me at ease. I was in such awe of him to begin with, because, as I say, I'd seen all these extraordinary films he'd made. So he did have to put me at ease during it, which he was able to do. He never raised his voice. He was very quiet. He was open to suggestions. Didn't necessarily mean he would use them, but you never felt that that you were treading on his toes or anything like that. I loved working with Stanley Kubrick. And Gary Lockwood, who's the other actor, we've remained friends for 50 years. We see each other all the time, because we do a lot of screenings like this one, or we do, I don't know if you have Comic-Cons over here, but they have autograph shows all over the place, and we do a lot of those. We've been doing those together for about 20 years. So, got along with everybody very well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming here today. This is a special film to me. It was the first time I saw it, I was very frustrated by it because I didn't know at all what it meant, but having seen it a few more times, I've gotten great meaning from it. The question I had was actually answered a few questions back about the scene, the Daisy scene, so instead I'll ask about the sets. Like just these futuristic designs in the sets, and then even things like technology that you see in the film, like the picture phone call and everything, kind of coming up today in the modern world, where in a sense the film kind of predicted a lot of future technology. Like, how does it feel to have kind of experienced what's now modern technology in the 60s when it would have seemed more futuristic?
Well, you know, Stanley Kubrick was able to call upon 40 different corporations to try to make their best guess in terms of what their product would be like in the year 2001. And now we're talking about, this is 1966, and we're talking about 2001. So it's amazing how many things came true. And the other thing about this film is that you probably, or maybe you don't know, is that there was no computer-generated special effects. Didn't exist in those days. Everything you see in this film was filmed one way or the other, was filmed directly. And today there are all kinds of things they could do. For example, I'll just illustrate one. Well, illustrate two. In the centrifuge, there's a scene just before we watch an interview that we've given to the BBC. And Gary Lockwood is seemingly upside down, eating at the top of the wheel. And then in the hub of the wheel, a little door opens, and I emerge and I climb down a ladder to the bottom of the wheel. Of course, it's going around creating artificial gravity, supposedly. And I get some food, and I seemingly, this is all in one shot, I seemingly walk upside down to him and slide next to him, and then we watch this interview. Well, what they did was he had a harness underneath his costume, and it was holding him. He was actually upside down. They had to paste the food to the fork so it wouldn't fall to the floor. And I just stood in place, and they revolved him down to me. And that's how they got that shot. The other interesting one, was the more difficult one, which today they wouldn't need to do with a stuntman. They'd probably use a computer-generated special effect, is when I am blown into the emergency airlock when Hal won't let me in. And how that was, and it looks like I'm thrust toward you weightlessly, back and forth. How that was shot was actually that way. The opening to the pod was in the ceiling, which was about as high, maybe a little higher than this. And the camera is where I'm sitting here, shooting up. And they had a platform out of camera range that I would dive off head first, free fall toward the camera. So the circus roustabout, who was going to help me do the stunt, had measured the drop. And so they had a wire which was attached to a rope, and he measured the drop twice and tied huge knots so that he could grab hold of it when it was time to save me, so I wouldn't go crashing into the camera. So on action, I dove head first, and he's waiting up there for that first knot to arrive at his gloves. As soon as that did arrive at his gloves, he jumped off his platform, and I went hurtling back up to the ceiling. Then he was waiting for the next knot. He's already down on the floor by now. When the next knot came, he let go again. I went hurtling back toward the camera. And that's how that was done. And of course, you couldn't see the wire or the rope attached to me because my body was between the rope and the camera. So that's how we got that effect.
It wasn't a stunt, you know.
And thank God, we did that only in one take. Thank God. The reason they couldn't use the stuntman is, if you remember, in my hurry to try to save my friend, I'd forgotten my helmet. So it had to be my face.
Hi.
Hi.
It's great that you've come to Derry today. It's fantastic to see you here. My question is that since you spent most of the film wearing like a space helmet, did you ever suffer from like claustrophobic or have a panic attack on something?
No, I suffered from being too hot a lot. Especially, I didn't really spend that much time wearing the helmet. It was usually without the helmet. But with the helmet, it was very hot, and they had an air hose with compressed hair, coming up, sort of the rear end of my costume when I was in close-up, so that I wouldn't be suffering. But when it was a long shot, I had to suffer. But I could breathe all right. But you know, most of when I think of the film, I was mostly in that kind of jumpsuit. You know,
Hi, my question basically is, I remember watching this film for the first time when I was 10 years old with my father, who's right beside me now, and seeing the last scene, just like, I'd never seen anything like it before, so watching this my fourth or fifth time watching it, it kind of reminds me of when I was really young seeing it, and it's a very nostalgic thing for me, but I also kind of get that theme of rebirth with the film, with the human race becoming the fetus, or whatever people's various impressions may be of it. But I was just kind of wondering, how do you feel about that kind of the kind of theme of rebirth in the film? Of with both, like, for me, it's obviously the nostalgic connection, but I kind of feel there's a lot of influences in it within that.
well, I think your interpretation is the correct one. I mean, I feel the same way. You know, it is what it is, and I think it is rebirth, but on another level. I mean, I think it is, just as in the opening of the film, it's rebirth, or at least symbolically is, when we see him throw the bone in the air, and the next thing we know, we're in modern times, and like that.
A pleasure to see you. Great film. I've watched it a few times, and it's really significant to the whole science fiction genre, which me and my father introduced me to it years ago. And it's hugely significant to me and to him, obviously. What I was going to ask you is, we talk about you and Hal at the beginning of the film, but actually that's nearly halfway into the film. There's a huge chunk of film before you come in, and there's a chunk of film after. So I always think about the Hal story as almost like a subplot within the film, within the larger film, and I think, with the larger film being about the monolith and all that. And I think, I was wondering, in your opinion, is there a connection between the Hal subplot and the larger plot of the monolith? Do you feel, is there any connection between maybe the monolith, why is the monolith maybe affecting Hal? Is there a connection there in your opinion?
I never thought about that, offhand, I don't think there's a specific connection. I think that makes the plot, the whole thing with Hal, in a sense, Hal having to keep a secret, and I think that's what drives him crazy, is he's keeping, as we find out, once Hal's been taken apart, and suddenly this communication that's been recorded early on explaining to me, my character, of what the real true reason is for the trip. And I think it's, for some reason, this conflict within Hal causes him to kind of go crazy, in a sense. But I don't think there's necessarily a connection. I think it is more of a subplot in terms of the overall picture, the overall story of this film.
I think Kubrick described the film as 4 stories, because some people said there's no narrative in this film. What is the story? What's going on? It's too enigmatic. But if you think about it, there is 4 blocks. There's the Dawn of Man, and then there's the Floyd, the discovery of the monolith, and then there's Hal, and then there's the end, the Stargate, the transcendence, rebirth, whatever. So it is a bit like 4, but obviously the monolith is the common thing, apart from what your point about, was there anything to do with the monolith and Hal?
It's because of that, it seems to me that the Hal plot is like the only part of the film that isn't directly about the monolith.
Yeah.
So that's why I thought, and because the film emphasizes so much about how, none of these computers have ever failed before, and there's no reason for them to fail and all this. And so you get the feeling that, well, there must be a factor. What is the factor? And in my mind, well, maybe it's the monolith. It's because they're getting close to Jupiter. Is that affecting that? I don't know. That was my interpretation.
Maybe there's a parallel, in the sense that it's man with the machine. So man is the god in this particular instance, rather than the terrestrial beings who are the god through the film.
Your interpretation is just, that's why, getting back to what I started saying, is that so many people sitting here in this room, in this audience, are going to have their own personal reaction, and they're all valid. I mean, that's what kind of makes this film kind of special. I mean, what you've just described is absolutely valid, but I don't think there's only one explanation to anything in this film. I think that's what makes it kind of unique, in my opinion.
Hello, Keir. Were there any major lessons that you took from working with Kubrick, and do you feel like you became a more enlightened person after coming off that collaboration?
Well, I must say, probably, after working with Stanley Kubrick, I've done 30 feature films, and I think 2001 was my 7th, something like that, approximately. And every director I ever worked with after that fell short. Nobody could come up to the experience of working with this genius. And he, tell you a funny story, he had such an eye for detail. Nothing got by Stanley, nothing, or almost nothing. My wife, who's here with me, Maya, she caught what I'm about to describe. Nobody else had caught it. Nobody connected with the film had ever noticed what I'm about to describe to you. In the scene on the space station when Dr. Floyd is walking and he's stopped by some Russian scientists who question him as to the purpose of his trip, and he makes up a story because he's not going to tell these Russians what the real reason is. They're going to talk about this monolith that's been found. And there's a man and three women scientists. And one of the women, in fact maybe two, but at least one of the women has no lines at all. She's just listening. And she has a blue sweater over the back of her chair. Now, just before he reaches that group of scientists, as he's walking, there's kind of a public address system. It's a little muffled. My wife caught it. You have to, next time you see this film, if you see it again, you listen for this muffled announcement. And now I'm going to describe what happened to this blue sweater. Depending on the angle, the camera angle, the blue sweater's there in one case, but when the camera has been moved for another angle so they could see a different person in that group, there's no blue sweater. What does that mean? It means the continuity girl goofed and she forgot to move the sweater for the next angle. Well, who caught it? Stanley caught it. There was nothing else he could do about it, but he put that little announcement, and the announcement in that muffled announcement is, a blue sweater has been found. And he's urging the people to go to the Lost and Found and find the blue sweater. Nobody had ever caught that except my wife.
Attention to detail, yeah. It's famous for that. Look, we're going to wrap it up now very soon, so maybe just take a few more. So who didn't get a chance yet? That guy. Okay.
Evening. I was just listening to you talk about how much you enjoyed working on the set, but how did you feel whenever you saw it all put together, and would you have changed anything?
Oh, where is he speaking from? I can't tell.
Over here.
Oh, hi.
Hi there.
It blew my mind. I mean, it just, I could, you know, so much of the special, as I say, we weren't generated by a computer, but so much of what we see in this film happened after I was done. I didn't see the Dawn of Man sequence. I didn't see this section with Dr. Floyd. So it was, I love the Dawn of Man sequence is my favorite section of the film. Maybe because I had least idea of what I did see the set for the space station. I walked on it. I didn't see any of the shooting, and of course the part that I was in. But the Dawn of Man sequence was done when I was completely finished with the film and went home. That's when the Dawn of Man sequence was written. And it has my favorite moment, or two favorite moments. One I've already described, when he throws the bone up in the air. I think that's one of my favorite moments in the film. The other is, just before that, when the lead ape, which I think his name in the film is Moonwatcher, is just seemingly fiddling with some bones, aimlessly. But then in one of his thrusts, a little piece of bone kind of flies off in a certain way to catch his attention. And you know, you ever notice a dog, when a dog sees something that it's so curious, and the dog will just do this? That's all. Have you seen it? It's very common. It just does. Well, he did that. When he got one of those thrusts, his head just goes slightly, just like a dog does. And then he does, with great powerful strides now, is really beating those bones. And the next thing we see is that they're killing animals for themselves to eat, and finally driving off the other group of ape men and killing one of them. Anyway.
What was the hardest bit of making the film?
Oh. Well, the hardest, the scariest was the one I've already described, but I was dropped, free fall. There wasn't anything that was, the only thing difficult about this film, we had very long hours, extremely long hours. But we had the whole weekend off, which sometimes in film you don't get. So, I love making it so much that I can't describe it as hard. It was challenging and exciting, but never hard as such.
This way. Marty. First of all, it's a pleasure to meet you. And I spoke to you in the foyer earlier on.
Yes,
I was 11.
Yeah,
that's right. I was 11 when I first seen this, and I spent a full week in the Rialto Picture House every day watching this. It's amazing. But can I ask you one question? What was your thoughts on 2010, the year they made contact?
It was in our business, we refer to jobs very often as being a gig, right? A gig. It was a nice gig, but it didn't come anywhere near, I mean, there were some wonderful actors in it. Wonderful actors. But it wasn't Stanley Kubrick. I mean, it was, the only thing that was a little different, in that case, I did have the actual voice of Hal to work with because they pre-recorded him. And so I had the real voice of Hal. But other than that, it was a pleasant gig, but it wasn't world-shaking for me, the way 2001 was.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
He's had his hand up for a long time.
Hello, Keir.
Hi.
Thank you for coming to Derry.
Okay, my pleasure.
I'm a huge fan. I'm going to keep it short. Would you indulge us? Would you say the line?
Open the pod bay door, Hal.
Thank you.
It's very, we just talked about the fact there's very little dialogue in 2001. The only time I ever had a long speech was a scene which we shot where I had a scene where I was talking to Mission Control about this problem, about the part that's gone wrong, and that I have to go and explore and find and test it to see. And it's the part that Hal was involved in. And it was a very difficult speech to learn because it was technological gobbledygook to me, very difficult. So for weeks, I didn't have a big burden for lines in this film, except for this speech. I went over it and over it and over it and over it. It was like learning a foreign language phonetically. So I learned it, and we shot it. And then in editing the film, Stanley decided he didn't need it because it was redundant. It was too similar to another scene where Mission Control is talking to us. However, I will go to my grave with this speech, and I will do it for you. And I went like this. Mission Control is X-Ray Delta 1. At 1920 onboard fall prediction center, and our 90000 computer showed Alpha Echo 35 unit as possible failure within 48 hours. Request check your in-ship system simulator. Also confirm your approval our plan to go EVA and replace Alpha Echo 35 unit prior to failure. Mission Control, this is X-Ray Delta 1, transmission concluded. And that's 60 years ago. And the only thing I want to just say is every time, I mean, I don't always necessarily sit through every screening that I go to, but very often I do. And I can only tell you, when that music begins and we see the sun rising over the moon or the earth, whatever it is, and I get chills even today, and I say to myself, thank you, Stanley. Thank you, Stanley. So I just want you to know.
It's a long time ago, so you might not even remember something so specific. But they're in the scene where you're an old man and you're sitting by the dinner table eating, and when you get up, and the astronaut's watching you from behind, and you get up to kind of check the hallway. I really like that detail where you're still gnawing on a piece of food as you're making the journey across the room. But do you remember what was going through your head in that scene? What you were kind of thinking of as you were going to investigate the corridor?
Well, each version of my character as he grows older senses the next version. We never look back and see the first version. It's only the younger version sensing the next version, and then we see. And so the version of me eating at the table was just a slightly different way of doing it from my point of view. And then I knocked the glass off. That was that was a suggestion I made to Stanley. I asked, rather than just kind of hearing something and turning my head, let me have a little action that I can be in the middle of a gesture And then I sense, which is the older version on the bed, then I sense the presence of the next older one. That was really all that was going on with me at that point, from an actor's point of view, anyway. Oh, and I also had to, if I were to play the role today, I think I'd even have a better understanding, because I'm a little older than I was then, but I had to kind of concentrate and move in such a way that I thought a much older person would. And so that was interesting.
No teeth, you had to keep chewing, he said. Yeah. There's always a logical reason for all this stuff as well, too. Look, it's getting sort of late now, whatever. I know he's been through a long movie, but very, very enjoyable, of course. So look, I wanted to wrap things up because Keir's going to be hanging on for a wee bit longer here. If there's anybody that is interested in getting an photograph here, look, we'll be here for a few minutes longer. But I'm sorry I had to cut short the questions over that because we could be here for another 20 or minutes or half an hour. Look, so on behalf of everybody, look, and obviously you can see how big a thing it is for you to come here, travel all this far, and for people to be able to actually have this experience of talking to you directly about this film. So thanks very much, Keir, for coming.
My pleasure. Yes, thank you all.
One other favour, look, I know some of you were handed little surveys for the night just to give us a little bit of feedback.